Assalamu alaikum students. Today we are going to discuss the last section of our essay tradition and individual talent. So far हमने जो एलियट का concept of tradition है उसको हमने study किया है, उसको समझा है, क्योंकि ये जो essay था tradition and individual talent, it was like a response to romantic जो theory of poetry है, ये जो romantic movement थी, particularly Wordsworth के जो theory of poetry Wordsworth ने दी कि poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and subjectivity is of remarkable importance, and poet is a superior being. He has a comprehensive soul, he has a comprehensive knowledge of human nature. In this way, according to Wordsworth, poet is a superior being, and that's why whatever that superior being experiences and whatever he imagines, so that could be considered something superior. So that was obviously one point of view. Subjectivity obviously is of this value, but Eliot he goes towards the objective जो state of mind है या जो objective opinion है उसकी तरफ जाता है, and he emphasizes that though it is mandatory for a poet to have a personality, but it is also mandatory for him to escape that personality. His person should not be present in the poetry. There should be like a clear cut differentiation, clear cut segregation between a poet, a man, and poet, the poet. So ये उसका view है, and his theory is also called as the theory of impersonality. So, how, for example, then we have this question that how can we achieve that impersonality? How, for example, as a person, how, for example, anyone can negate his or her personality? तो ये इस पर इसका जो process है, तो वो according to Eliot is that कि आप जो tradition है, from tradition, obviously his concept is dynamic. He does not say that you have to follow the tradition blindly, right? So he says that कि tradition, for example, is the past poetry on that particular field in which poet is writing poetry, and the poet must have the knowledge of previous poets. Poet must have knowledge of previous movements in poetry, and not only that, the poet should be focusing on the major poets. There should be the minor poets also of significant importance. So this is like his way that if a poet is reading that previous poetry and he's understanding previous poetry, so in this way he can contribute more to the cause of poetry, and in this way he is like correcting the past as well, and he is improving himself as well, because when he would be studying the past poets, so it would be like he is like getting knowledge that, well, okay, if I'm thinking these things, so before me certain poets have also thought these things and they have also written these things, and how he can improve upon them, and how he can learn more, and how he can understand more, and how he can, even if something is wrong in the past, how he can correct that. So it happens. And for one example, for example, there was a poets, अभी पता नहीं आप लोगों ने ये पढ़े हैं या नहीं पढ़े, मेटाफिजिकल पोइट्री का एक सेगमेंट आता है हमारे इंग्लिश लिटरेचर में. So वो जो metaphysical poets थे, तो they were the poets in 17th century, and at that time there were two critics, Dr. Johnson and John Dryden. So they categorically rejected their poetry. But later on in 19th century, Eliot and then other critics, they sort of reinvented them. They reinstated them that their poetry is not like a bad poetry. So it was like one way that they were correcting the past as well, and they were giving a new dimension of things as well. So this is what Eliot says, and the main point of is main point of attack is the subjectivity or the spontaneity, that if a poet says that he has his meaning alone, that whatever he thinks, it has never been thought by anyone. This is something which Eliot does not like, and he wants that the poet is not like some authority kind of thing. The poet is a medium. This was a new definition of poetry. That poet is a medium through which certain emotions, certain feelings, certain thought they pass through, and they are processed, and then after processing, those thoughts are presented in the form of poetry for the readers to read and to enjoy. In that way, it could be a superior form of art instead of that a personal kind of thing. So that's why he does not like advocate the that sentiment of individuality, that a poet's superiority lies in being individual. He says that poet's superiority lies in not being individual but being part of the tradition, being part of the chain, right? So in this way, he would be like more meaningful, more objective, and more general, and his art or his or her art would be more universal and more important to understand. But then in the last, that we must understand that okay, it does not mean that he does not want poet to be individual at all. He says that okay, if you have individuality, because individuality is linked with your personality. If you have a personality, then you would be an individual person, and then it would be difficult for you to negate that individuality or negate that personality to achieve the objective status of the art or the artist. So that's why in this last segment of this essay, we have to discuss that what is the place of individuality there, where we can place a poet as an individual and what is like this. So this is I'm going to read for you guys and explain certain things. If you couldn't understand anything, you can later ask me another question answer session. In such a theory of poetry demanding impersonality, when obviously that Eliot's theory of poetry demands that a poet should be impersonal, and then the question arises that where is the place for individuality or the poet's personality, right? If we conceive of personality as the totality of mental traits, characteristics, and individual personality or self, there is no place for the presentation of such personality in poetry. Obviously there could be Wordsworth was generalizing something, that a poet is a superior being and he is like an intellectual. He has deeper knowledge of human nature, he has a more comprehensive soul, he has deeper knowledge uh, of philosophy. So if you see this, what Wordsworth was doing, he is actually giving a superior status to poet. Now it is possible that there may be some person, and that person is also poet, and that person is having this these characteristics, right? It may be possible that that person may have deeper knowledge of human nature, that person may have deeper knowledge of philosophy, that person may produce art which is obviously great and universal, and at the same time he is subjective as well. But it would be an individual case. All poets are not intellectual, all poets are not having that greater knowledge of human nature, all poets are not having that superior kind of, let's say, uh, raw talent, right? So there could be like, obviously, it's not that there is a poet and then poet is something. So that's why Eliot lays in Wordsworth's view, we don't find like for example, there is a poet. So how that poet has a superior soul, how that poet has a superior knowledge of human nature, how that a poet has superior knowledge of philosophy, or all these things. Wordsworth does not tell us this link. This link is missing. He says that it is like a kind of nature's gift. But we see that all the poets, they may not be having that nature's gift. So Eliot becomes more concrete, where Wordsworth was, let me say, mysterious or speculative, or he was like idealizing something. Eliot's view is more near to reality, right? So according to him, that if the poet is to be a superior soul, a comprehensive soul, and if the poet is supposed to be having a greater knowledge of human nature, how he can have this greater knowledge of human nature? He can have this greater knowledge of human nature by following tradition, by studying past poets, because we understand that this poetry or literature, generally speaking, it is about human nature. These are the impressions of human nature, and there are elements of philosophy and intellect and representation. So by reading that poetry in this way, poet is not only that he is refining his sensibilities. Remember that what is sensibility? It is power of perception. That poet is not only enhancing and refining his sensibilities, poet is also getting this knowledge, right? Poet is also getting more experiences about human nature, more knowledge about human nature. How it is possible? By reading previous poets, by reading the tradition, by following the tradition. And in this way, the poet will, when the poet will have this knowledge, he would be able to produce something which is more universal, which is more general, and which is more philosophical. Right? From Wordsworth's point of view, we don't get this idea that how a poet is going to be philosophical or intellectual or having a comprehensive soul or having this knowledge of human nature, because obviously this knowledge of human nature is not earned simply or easily. Right? Human nature is a very complicated thing because let me say, because humans, they do not have any nature. All humans are different, all humans have different kind of thing. So that's why we talk about a general human nature, right? So that's why Eliot, he comes with this point of view that instead of that, okay, we should be like saying that if someone can write poetry, then that poet is superior being, and that poet has a comprehensive knowledge of human nature, and he's a comprehensive soul, and what he thinks it is actually thought by all the humanity. So it is not possible. Eliot becomes more concrete, and this is what he says, that individuality does not mean that your individual is something, because it is not possible to exist individually. Everything is interconnected. All things are interconnected with each other, right? Your intellectual environment, your demography, your geography, your knowledge, your intellectual environment in which you are existing, all these things have their significance in the production of art. For instance, if we had to talk in, let's say, technical terms like production or something like that. So that's why he says that individuality does not mean that you have created something without knowing that maybe some other have already created this thing. So ye aap nahi kar sakte ho. So that's why he says that the poet, says Eliot, has not a personality to express. It's not the job of the poet, right, according to Eliot, कि वो अपनी personality को express करे, right? Because obviously, if he is expressing his personality, so that would be a limited kind. It would be like adding limitations to poetry, right? जैसे फॉर इंस्टेंस वी टॉक्ड इन वर्ड्सवर्थ, अगर आपको रिकॉल हो तो वर्ड्सवर्थ में फॉर एग्जांपल व्हेन ही सेज दैट कि जो चॉइस थीम्स की चॉइस है कि रस्टिक लाइफ फॉर एग्जांपल शो कीजिए, look, the whole world is not rustic. It means that poetry is for rustic people only, right? Our Wordsworth's view of rustic people only, right? So that's why Eliot didn't agree, and he says that poet has not a personality. He is only a medium in which impressions and experiences combine in peculiar and unexpected ways. Right? So this is important, that when poet will having this knowledge of human nature and all these things, so in that capacity, poet is like a being जिसके अंदर ये सारे experiences एक unusual way से हैं. Eliot also agrees principally with, for example, S.T. Coleridge. S.T. Coleridge is of the opinion that there are two types of imagination. One is primary imagination, there is secondary imagination, and primary imagination is a quality which every human being possesses. But secondary imagination is only possessed by poets, by artists. So, well, the poet has this ability, but again, then only this ability, only this talent, it would be not sufficient, right? There should be certain training of that talent. There should be certain training of that personality, and how that training will be achieved. It will be achieved by following the tradition of the poetry. Right? So that's why Eliot here says that. He is only a medium in which impressions and experiences combine in peculiar and unexpected ways. It is not even necessary to personally experience uh, all the emotions the poet seeks to express in a poem. Now, this is obviously something. Obviously ये theories हैं and these overlap with each other, जहाँ पर for example एक theorist या एक critic अपने आप को differentiate करता है, at certain point वो agree भी कर रहा होता है. जैसे ये for example एक point है जो अभी हमने पढ़ा, इसको मैं दोबारा आपके लिए पढ़ता हूँ, आप इसको जरा गौर से देखें कि it's not necessary that the poet must experience the emotions which he wants to express in poetry. No, the poet needs to have finer sensibility, a superior power of. This would be obviously natural. You cannot learn anything, even if you spend your whole life in reading poetry. You cannot have that finer sensibility. This is obviously very important, right? So you cannot have that finer sensibility. This is God gifted kind of thing. It would be there. Yes, Wordsworth would say that that finer sensibility or that power of perception which is endowed to you by nature is sufficient. Eliot would say no, you got to train that natural sensibility, right? You got to train that natural sensibility by the knowledge of human nature, which will you achieve by reading tradition, all these things. So that's why it is more significant, it is more important. So this is what Eliot here principally agreeing with Wordsworth on one point, that well, the poet has finer sensibility, but again, then he does not say that that raw sensibility is sufficient. He says that that the poet needs to improve that raw sensibility. So what will happen when the poet will improve that raw sensibility? He will become a medium. He will become something else. He will not be that person which he is in his real life. He will become another person, and that another person has that plastic power. That person has that transformation or that transforming personality, that he can imagine himself, right, into somebody, into some emotion. He can I mean to say that he can imagine an experience, right, which would be equally like as someone has actually felt it. In other words, simply to say that poet has this ability that he can imagine an experience एज एन एक्चुअल एक्शन, एज एन एक्चुअल एक्सपीरियंस, जैसे चीज रियल में हुई हो। तो ये नहीं कि वो कोई रियली खुद जाकर वो फील करे। By utilizing his superior sensibility, poet can imagine actual thing. He does not need to experience it personally. So this is what the point which he is trying to make. It's not that like Wordsworth कि अगर वो नेचर में जाएगा तो वहां जाकर पोइट्री लिख सकेगा, अदरवाइज इट वुड नॉट बी पॉसिबल, राइट? नो, इस इज दैट कि वो किसी भी प्लेस में बैठकर अगर वो इमेजिन कर सकता है, तो उसकी जो इमेजिनेशन की पावर है, बाय यूजिंग दैट पावर ऑफ इमेजिनेशन, ही कैन राइट पोइट्री बाय सिटिंग इन अ सिटी. So that's what ये इस line का जो meaning है कि even it's not even necessary to personally experience all the emotions a poet seeks to express in a poem. Even imagined experience will do. The appeal of a poem does not depend on the events in the life of the poet or the emotions experienced by him. It is the intensity of the poetic process and not the romantic spontaneity which is the important thing. So it is the intensity of poetic process, और वो poetic process की जो intensity है वो कैसे होगी? वो उसकी power of imagination से होगी, वो उसके जो उसका previous experience होगा, knowledge होगा, उससे होगी. And then, but having said all this, it is equally necessary to note that Eliot also says that unless a poet has a personality, he would not feel any necessity to escape from it. So it does not mean that Eliot does not want that poets may not be individual or they may not be having personality. क्योंकि अगर आपकी personality होगी तो आप उसको escape करेंगे ना. अगर आपकी personality ही नहीं है तो फिर तो आप जो मर्जी करते रहें, right? So when you know about yourself that this is you are, this is your personal likes and dislikes, but your personal likes and dislikes have no place in poetry. Right? In poetry, you are a medium. You are something which is obviously totally different from the person you are in your real life. But personal emotions must be transmuted into something objective, which have the right of existence independent of the poet's personality. So this was the last point जो हमने इस question में discuss करना था. The last is conclusion. इसको मैं read कर देता हूँ, बल्कि आप में से कोई इसको read करे ताकि ये sum up हो जाए जो अब तक हमने पढ़ा है. Who will read? Yes, I want a good reader from you. Hurry up, we don't have as much time. Are you guys there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, read it now.
Okay. Conclusion.
Yes,
T.S. Eliot's theory conceives of a dynamic tradition which embraces the past as well as the
as well as
present.
the present.
It has place for
Good.
all
Writers.
writers, not merely the great ones.
Hmm. As a classist.
As a classist, he does
Allow
not allow for subjectivity in poetry.
originality and individuality.
Originally, and
Okay, I read it.
individualities
Originality and
severed from
individuality.
common tradition.
Okay, okay, stop here. Originality and individuality severed from common tradition is of no significance. However, Eliot does not deny the poet his personality. He propounds that tradition is the weapon and resource of individual talent. It means that through tradition, a poet can become individual as well. It's not that कि without tradition वो जो भी सोच रहा है तो वो कहे कि जी मैंने ये खुद से सोचा है. भी आप ये कैसे कह सकते हैं आपसे खुद से सोचा है आपने कौन सा इसको किसी से कंपेयर किया है, right? So the really new is the logical descendant of what has gone before, as the metaphysical poets were the direct and normal development of the present age, a balance between the control of a system which is provided by tradition and the freedom of inspiration. The individual talent is essential to art. Very important point. A balance between the control of a system which is provided by tradition, and the freedom of inspiration is essential to art. If the control is lost, the result is creative anarchy. If the freedom is lost, the result is creative sterility, as Sheen Lucy so effectively puts it. All right, this is the end of this question, and the next question is obviously of the same value. We'll see that if we get to discuss this. So far, if you have any question, if you have any confusion, you can talk about this because we have ended the main thing. One aspect is remaining, वो मैं आपको next session में explain कर दूंगा. Anything else you want to ask? Anything, if you have any confusion, so you can ask. Yes, go on. Everything clear? Okay, then. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next session with some new discussions. Take care of you. Allah Hafiz.